This is a true account of something strange that happened to me and two friends one summer in the early 2000s. It happened in the town that I grew up in, with one of the friends being a lifelong friend from childhood and the other a college friend of his. We had gone to different schools, and being home for the summer, we were just having a lot of fun partying and whatnot. This particular night, I got together with my friend James and his friend Mark. It was a hot night, and we decided to jump the fence to our own town pool and go swimming. We had done this a dozen times before and have never had any trouble, and only ever needed to keep an eye out on local cops. We got there, hopped the fence, and stargaze on top of the canopies, and then we went swimming. We weren't that loud, as we didn't want to attract any attention of any cops through looking for kids. About an hour into being there, all of us in the pool, we heard a low grumble come from the woods that surrounded the pool on three sides. It rose quickly, intensity and volume, with a rapid Doppler effect that came towards us from deep in the woods. It sounded like a pack of very angry dogs or wolves or something, all roaring ever louder like talking over one another. It came so fast, charging to the tree line in the chain-link fence that surrounds the pool grounds. I've never been so frightened in my life. The thing I can remember clearly was there were no sounds of footballs whatever. It was moved to the woods at such a rapid speed, with no discernible thumps or branches being crushed underfoot or branches or anything being moved. The awful roaring reached a crescendo just as it broke the tree line and got to the fence. Or, so our ears told us because we couldn't see anything there. We all remained frozen in the pool, just staring and waiting for our deaths. I really don't know how long we stayed motionless in the pool staring, but the sound stopped abruptly when it got to the end of the grounds. It was such an awful, heart-chilling sound. It made her bun run cold on a hot summer night. After God knows how long, we all snapped out of it and got out of the pool. We hauled ourselves out, grabbed her clothes, and ran dripping wet and jumped the fence and took off. Now, the thing is, this is the suburbs, only about 20 minutes outside of New York City. So there are no bears, no wolves, and I've never seen a dog without a master, much less a pack of wild dogs out there. This was one of the most frightening moments of my life. I have no idea what it was. I actually completely forgot about the incident to a few years ago when my friend James brought it up, and the entire thing came flooding back at once. The only thing I can compare the sound to is one on a Bigfoot documentary, where I saw a man who said that he heard one mimic the sound of this. That's the closest I've heard. Being that it is the suburbs outside a very densely packed city, and knowing the size of the woods, I find it near impossible for it to be that these woods are not large enough at all to sustain something like that. It's bordered by schools, businesses, and houses, so I don't really know what it was after all this time. I asked my friend about it again 2 Christmases ago, and he said he thought it was aliens. I haven't spoken to Mark as he was more of my friend's friend, but I am now curious what he thinks after all this time. I apologize for its length, but I needed to tell this since no one believes me this summer. I had several encounters with mysterious creatures, some really terrifying. This past summer, I worked at a Boy Scout camp, and there had been rumors of spirits patrolling the nature trail on the far side of the camp. One night after work, me and 2 other coworkers, Steve and Jim, decided to walk the trail at midnight. We were about halfway through the trail when Jim told us to stop, and we listened. It sounded like something was gnawing on bones and tearing flesh. We shone our flashlights to see the remains of a deer, but the rib cage was torn open, almost flattened. The deer's entrails were scattered across the 4th floor, and the skull was crushed. And we could still hear the noises. Steve told us that we should get the fuck out of here, but we pressed on deeper into the forest. Suddenly, Jim stopped in front of us, and I asked him what's up, and he just pointed his light forward, about 20 yards away. We saw this thing. It crouched with its back behind us, tearing into what we believed was a piece of the deer. It stopped and slowly rose, standing almost 10 feet, and it dropped whatever it was eating and turned around. Its face was nothing but a skull, but no human skull. It looked like a deer skull. Its arms were long and lanky, ending in large claws. Jim screamed, "Holy fuck," as we began to run. The creature let out a horrifying screech, and I made the mistake of turning around. The beast went on all fours and charged at us, breaking smaller trees and stumps as it ran at us. We continued to run as we got off the trail and stopped as we got into the pool building. As we collected ourselves again, I could hear something outside. When I looked outside, this creature was standing under a light post, breathing slowly. It destroyed the light above it with one swipe of its clawed hands before disappearing back into the darkness. The next encounter was a couple of days later, when it was me and two other lifeguards, Colin and Maya. They were sitting in the office as a thunderstorm ravaged the camp. We watched the rain when a flash of lightning showed us something, standing on the other side of the pool fence. Maya shrieked as the beast disappeared. Where it looked like it walked towards the lake, I followed the beast into the pouring rain, where I unfortunately lost it. The next morning, we found that the geese that lived near the lake were torn to shreds, and it took us an hour to clean up the entire mess. The next encounter was the next to last week of camp, and this was honestly the most terrifying experience. It was a Wednesday night, and I traveled the nature trail alone, and then I heard it. Something was laughing at me, and it sounded like it was close to me. I turned and saw the biggest creature I ever saw. It stood about 10 feet and had a deer skull for a head, with massive bloody antlers. It began to trace me as I ran the trail. I could hear that the brush behind me was crushed, and the beast was breathing heavily. It felt like hours, but it was only a few minutes till I figured I lost it. After I stopped to catch my breath, I could feel my backpack being torn. And when I turned, I saw it. I then locked myself in the pool office, and I was terrified. When I heard it ram the door, when it stopped, I could hear someone's voice, and through the crack, I could see it skulk around the building, and I never saw it again that night. The final encounter was the last. It was during the last week when each night I saw the creature lumber through the parking lot. It looked like it had something in its grasp as it tore into it. I ran back to my campsite, and as I laid in my sleeping bag, I heard footsteps trudging through the campsite. When I looked up, I saw its blood-covered snout poke its head through the tent flaps. Its red eyes casted an eerie glow inside the tent, and I could hear it breathe, and what I thought was laughter. Each night, it returned and stuck its head in various tents, until one staff member woke up and screamed. The next day, we couldn't find him, and spent the day looking for him until we found him in the parking lot. He looked pale and told us that it grabbed him and took him to the old BB range, and when it left, he ran. That night, me and 3 other people took flashlights and went to explore the range. It was decrepit, and vines grew all over it. And then we saw them, several carcasses of deer, strewn about the place in various stages of decay. And they appeared to be partially consumed. One guard screamed as the window rose from behind the rock wall in front of the range and charged at us. We ran back to the science building, and we watched. As it came out in the light, this one had blue eyes and was extremely thin, and it had 3 long fingers, ending in claws, and it scraped the ground and sniffed the air until it slowly returned to the forest. That was the last encounter I had, though I plan on returning to find it again. This happened when I was 11 years old. I used to have this little electric mini bike that went about 20 or so miles per hour and had a small little light on the front of it so I could see in the dark. I used it to get to my friend's house and back. On one particular summer night, I drove over to a friend's house on my mini bike at around 5 or 6 p.m. to play with him on his Xbox 360. I believe we play Call of Duty 4 or World at War. I'm not sure which one we played. All I know is that I stayed there till around 9 at night and since my parents were easygoing parents and we lived about 2 miles away, they didn't mind that I stayed home late. When I went outside of my friend's house after I say goodbye to him, I went to go on my mini bike to drive back home. Keep in mind, the whole way there, around his house of mine too, are largely wooded areas. So, we would always hear creatures moving around and always hear crickets when I hopped on my bike, and I happened to notice I didn't hear anything at all. Not even any crickets. It was just silence. This was a very odd because we always hear them, and there are thousands of them in the woods. There was something that made them quiet. Take note that the mini bike was electric and didn't make much sound when it accelerated, since it was summer and pretty early in the summer around mid-July. It was still pretty light out at 9 p.m., not too light, but enough to make out someone's face from about 10 to 15 yards away. As I started heading home, I felt very uneasy, as if I was being watched, and I still heard nothing of the crickets. I was coming up at a T-junction, where I would have to turn left to continue down the road for about a half-mile, and make another left at an unlit intersection, it going down straight until my house came up. As I was approaching the T-junction, I could barely make out something in the tree straight ahead of me. I saw a pair of eyes in the trees. My first instinct was thinking it was maybe an owl or something, because we got quite a few owls up here where we live, until I saw I had blood-red eyes. When I got closer, I could tell whatever the fuck that thing was not an owl, and his eyes were 9 feet off the ground. Before I go on, I must say there's a legend around where I lived at night. Sasquatch would come out and hunt, which was obvious, or so I thought. Bullshit. I never believed in Bigfoot or cryptids. But when I saw these eyes and how far off the ground they were, I immediately thought of this legend. I pissed my pants when I saw this because I was a very paranoid person at the time, and still am, and would always assume the worst. I was terrified, and knew that I would have to make this T-junction very fast and book it the fuck home when I turned left. I was going as fast as I could on that mini bike. I lost sight of the eyes and thought thing had just ran off until I heard the woods. But whatever this thing was easily keeping pace with me. I started crying at this point and kept just driving as fast as I could down the road. I started approaching the intersection when the tree stopped and there would be a bit of a clearing on all sides of it, and saw 9 and a 2-foot tall, hairy, disgusting-looking bees come out of the freaking woods. It was coming straight for me. I made the left as fast as I could, and I'm not sure if it was a miracle, but I saw a pair of headlights coming down the road. I turned behind me and saw the beast step into the woods because it would be illuminated by this person's headlights. As soon as I passed the person, I heard the crickets again and hoped that this beast would just leave me alone. When I got home, I shut the garage door, locked every window in the house, and my mom saw me obviously uneasy and pale and asked what was wrong. I never told her, or anyone for that matter. Not up until now. I don't know what the thing was. Possibly a Sasquatch, but whatever it was, I hope I never see it again. I've since moved into a dorm at my college, and so I don't visit my parents who still live where they did when I was 11. I hope no one ever has to endure the fear that I felt that night. Hello, I'm going to just call myself Hunter for privacy reasons. I'm a fairly strong guy and pretty brave, and I swear on my life this is true. 17 in Canada and First Nations territory. My mom and sister were in the city. Today's journey from where I live, and my dad was at work. We have 6 dogs because, well, my sister loves them, and I was alone to do anything really. I was bored on this day and decided to go for a walk up the creek close by my house. After that, I walked in the field that had a broken-down house since 1985, so this was a relatively old house. After a while, I decided to sit and enjoy the scenery. I had my earbuds in, so I didn't hear anything. I didn't realize, so after my MP3 player died, that everything was dead quiet. and I could swear for a split second I thought I heard a voice. And then I heard it. "Hunter, over here. I need help." It was my sister's voice, but it was off, like someone took a tube and said it. All I had was my hunting knife. I was split between my loyalty or my instincts telling me to run, until I remembered my sister was gone. So I started to walk away, very slowly, but then I heard heavy footsteps. My mind was racing, and I was like a statue. Then, suddenly, I felt breathing on my neck. I jabbed at whatever was behind me with my elbow until I felt what felt like a human shin. I bolted faster than I thought possible. While I was running, I got up my knife and slid under the fence and ran home. But then I looked behind me, and I saw a man with pale skin standing damn near 10 feet tall. He then opened his wide mouth, and he let out this horrifying screech. I ran harder while saying, "No, no, 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 no." When I got home, I locked the doors and got my sister's dog and stayed in my room the whole day for the first time. I was afraid. I still go on walks, and I always bring my knives, and I also always keep one earbud out. I talked about this with a few people, like my elders and my sister. My elder said it was an evil witch doctor trying to gain my life force, but my sister said it was the Wendigo. But I am sure of one thing. I never, and I mean never, ran so hard in my life. A little bit context before I start this. It was Christmas night. The day was pleasant and festive. Opening presents early in the morning with my sisters, hearty breakfast made my dad, delicious smells from the kitchen as mom and dad prepared a feast. Visits from extended family bringing pies and cakes for desserts. Around 2, we all sat down to eat and then lazed about for the rest of the afternoon into the evening. Now to the story. About 8. After everyone had left and the food was all put away for round 2 of the following day, I decided to head over to visit my friend in the next village. The drive would be about 10 minutes if I took back roads to get there, so I did. First, a little background on where my friend lived. It was a housing development surrounded by private lakes. You might call it a gated community. You could still drive through it freely after hours by entering one of 4 private entry points. Since the community was built around the lake, the road surrounding it went into a spiral sort of shape. The houses were sparsely positioned on the outermost part of the spiral road, closest to the 4 private entry points. As you drove in further, there were a lot more houses positioned closer and closer to the lake. My friend lived on the outer edge of this development, so once I reached the entry point, I would only take a few more minutes until I reached his house. His house, along with all the others, were far enough apart that you couldn't see them from the road as you drove by. There were either woods all around with long drives or open fields with long drives. You could see porch lights on in the distance, but that was about it. As I entered into the development, the speed limit dropped from 30 miles down to 20. There were no street lights in the development, and for some reason, I never put my high beams on. I couldn't go any faster than the speed limit because there were speed bumps in every 30 feet or so. It was about midnight. I remember having my driver's side window open, slightly taking in some fresh air. I remember driving in silence, which was usual for me. I must have been enjoying the quietness after a commotion of Christmas Day. I reached a section of road that had been barren fields on either side and wood set back. Houses were probably nestled back into the trees. As I drove, I noticed that something looked like someone walking up on a road ahead on the opposite side of the road, coming in my direction. Mind you, I was still going about 20 miles per hour the whole time, so it was probably less than a minute by the time the walker came into clear view. I got a quick scan of it in my windshield before my car was parked exactly in the parallel. This is what I saw. It was not a person. It stood on 2 legs, with long arms hanging down from his shoulders. It was strong-looking, lean, muscular, but not beefy in stature. It looked thin at the same time. It's still at least 7 feet tall. It was light-colored, not sure whether it was white, tan, yellow, or gray. It didn't appear to have fur, but some texture to the skin was there. It definitely wasn't smooth. There appeared to be something coming down off its back. I don't know what this was. All I can recall about is face, as small features that I had, but the mouth and jaw were noticeably large. It had pointed things atop its head, two things going straight upward, with something mingled between the two things. That's what I got from a quick scan, and from my observation of it as it neared my car and my car neared it. As my car became parallel to within a split second, I went from looking at my windshield to looking at it from my driver's side window. In that moment, its face quickly appeared down at me, and all I remember was the mouth opening wide. Out came a remarkable scream that I'll never forget. It gives me chill just thinking about it. It consisted of a high-pitched, real shriek enveloped by a deep, guttural growl. Both sounds happened simultaneously in that scream. I kept driving all the while. This was all happening so fast that I couldn't even have the chance to be scared or shocked or anything. I continued driving, went past my friend's house, and drove home. I called him to tell him what happened and that I just need to get back. I was probably running on adrenaline to get back home. Later on, I was in total shock after it sunk in. Have my driver's side window been open fully, it could have touched me, or worse, taken me. I'm certain of it. To this day, I still haven't worked out what it was. Anyone else ever see or hear anything similar to this? Well, to begin, I get my Native American blood from my mother's side. Her mother was a full-blooded Chippewa, although they didn't talk much about it. So I sought out elders when I was in my early 20s. When I was about 12 years old, my mom and dad got divorced, and we moved to Florida, where my mother's half-sisters lived. While visiting my Aunt Caroline, who lived in a little town called Osprey, 15 miles outside of Sarasota, which is on the western coast of Florida. South Tampa is where I saw a skunk ape. My mom and aunt were talking, so I decided to walk through the nature because I love it. I headed for a wooded area. I had to cross a cow pasture to get to the woods. About halfway across the pasture is when I saw this hairy man. It was standing next to a palmetto bush, just staring at me. That is all I remember, because the next thing I know, I'm walking on the street in front of my mom's house. I never told anyone until years later. Again, in my 20s at my dad's house in Michigan, there was a summer of strange events. Something was breathing outside my window, so loud it woke me up out of a sound sleep. My stepmother confided in me that she saw a tall, hairy man run across the backyard at night. My dad had two different events where something was making a high-pitched noise and slapped against the side of the trailer. My uncle, who lived across the street, said one night he heard what sounded like a grown man wrestling in the woods behind the house. During this time, one of my elders had asked my dad if he had a couple of friends who could build a sweat lodge on the 15 acres that my dad owns. My dad said yes, so they came out to do the ceremony. It was a year later, and they hadn't built the lodge, so I went to the elders and asked if something was wrong. One of them said, it just didn't feel right. I decided to tell them about my weird experiences, which had stopped after they did the ceremony on my dad's land. They all said that it was Unchi, which meant Bigfoot. They explained, he shows up when things are out of balance to remind people to live in a good way to restore balance. Later, I learned about putting down tobacco when entering the woods in their territory and asking permission to pass through. It is said that they will guide you and protect you, and although you will not know they are there, usually, the Bigfoot is also known as Kichi Sabe and is taught that they brought honesty to the people.